think that has always been missing with regards to our discussion on the impact on movements within the African American community, specifically what I consider to be the heyday of the black movement, being primarily the 60s and 70s, where we're talking about the Black Panther Party, we're talking about the SNCC, the SCLC, all these organizations that we talk about and their impact on black America today. What is way too often left out of the discussion is the impact of the Nation of Islam. Now, before I begin to start discussing the Nation of Islam, I want to give a couple of disclaimers. And it's not a dig on the nation itself, but first and foremost, I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam, never been a registered member of the Nation of Islam. In fact, I've never been to a Nation of Islam temple. Very much a fan of Malcolm. And so the reason why I want to give that disclaimer, not again to say anything negative about members of the Nation of Islam, but I think it gives a little bit more credibility to my analysis because I'm being very objective. I think I have an objective analysis of the impact of the Nation of Islam on Black America, and how it contributed so much to the movement, the golden era of the Black movement. So the issue is, and this is beside the theology of the Nation of Islam. And I'm not going to really go into a discussion about the Nation of Islam, who the Nation of Islam is, but just a summary of it. The Nation of Islam was an organization that came about in the 1930s. The primary figure of the Nation of Islam is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was seen as somewhat of a disciple or prophet of Master Farad Muhammad, who actually came into form and gave him the message, and ultimately forming this organization that had somewhat a Islamic basis to its theology. But more importantly, what came with that is a significant amount of doctrines as it related to black people and a way of life other than the traditional lobbying the government to provide us freedom, to provide us and make those rights wrong, to be able to integrate into the schools, to be able to go and sit at their lunch counters, to be able to vote, which is important, to be able to do all these things in order to allow black people to do what is seen as full citizenship in this country, as citizens, and who have contributed so much to this country and the building of this country from its blood, sweat, and tears. Then the nation was more focused on doing for self. It understood the idea of not begging, so to speak, a society that has oppressed you for almost 4 centuries to give you something, right? It's like so at what point do you begin to understand that these individuals that have oppressed you for such a long time are there to give you something, right? What the nation brought into the mix was this idea of do for self. They were not really feeling the whole integration thing. They were more focused on all aspects of the individual and focusing on the individual and individual values. it included the idea of abstaining from vices, not drinking, not smoking, not being involved in drugs, or not being in any of those vices, that we're going to abstain from that, and really going into the community and focusing on, you know, picking up those at the lowest level. One of the A lot of people who came into Islam, and I'm not talking about, of course, Islam has grown significantly as those who have converted to what they call true an Orthodox Islam. But many of the people from the nation were these individuals. They could have been drug dealers. Many of them were pimps. Many of them were people who were involved. Some of them were killers. And the fact that they were focusing on taking those types of individuals and providing them with this knowledge of self, doing for self, building them up, cleaning them up, and then building them up. And it was an extremely important movement in Black history. I think that if, again, without even going into the theology, you can say whatever you want about the Nation of Islam. Some people call them racist. Some people have a problem with the nation because of the fact that they were not necessarily practicing true Islam. That they were that he was playing God when he wasn't God. They've called them hypocrites. There's a lot of things that go along with the focus on Elijah Muhammad, as well as today, Minister Louis Farrakhan. They are very much anti-Semitism. We've heard all of that. But at the root of all of it still is this whole idea of these well-disciplined Black men and women who are indoctrinated to have a lot of pride in themselves, to focus on the family, to focus on maintaining a clean mind, a clean health, because they're into dieting is extremely important. All those things are really important. So, I mean, you have to look at this, the mindset of Black people. I was born in 1967. So you would have to figure that someone my age, as being an African American descendant of African slaves, I probably have like 9 to 10 generations probably in the U.S., meaning that from counting parents, grandparents, and great grandparents, 3,000 to 4,000 people are my ancestors directly, right? So you figure of those 3,000 to 4,000 people, they have all been in bondage in one way or the other. Whether you're talking about the 2 or 3 centuries of slavery, whether you're talking about at least a half a century or more, or at least a century of societal apartheid, whether we're talking about the the post-slavery, the Jim Crowism, separate but equal, being treated like second-class citizens, not having at least, and we're not talking about constructively, but actively not being treated like full citizens of this country. We're talking 3,000 or 4,000 people of my background, for most of us who are African American. That's a lot. And many of the laws and many of the things that have actually been done, it's not, we can just go to the Freedom of Information Act and realize that there was an effort by the highest level of government, including the Federal Bureau of Investigations under J. Edgar Hoover, who made a concerted effort to disturb any Black progress. There was a concerted effort because it was seen as a threat to society. The psychosis of that And once we did get into the point of integration, and keeping in mind one of the things that Dr. King said close to the time that um, uh, prior to his assassination was that he fears that he may have integrated his people into a burning house. So he wasn't really sure about the efforts that he made with regards to integration. And so I think that when you because I think that he felt that as many people would feel, and that's not a dig on Dr. King, because I think that Dr. King was one of our greatest leaders and impacted. Period. Whether we're talking black or whatever, one of the greatest leaders in American history. But I think that what happened is we felt like that, or many felt that all we needed to do was integrate. And once we integrated and we were giving full access to what which would be described as the so-called American dream, that everything else would fall into place. But the problem, of course, is, you know, it's one thing, it's like getting that someone giving you an opportunity to get into the door. Well, once you get into the door, you're ready for what's going to happen when you walk into this door. There's so much more that was going on with, because nobody was focused on the psychosis and the crisis and all the trauma that black people have been through for 4 centuries. That was really never really something that nobody really focused on. There's no organization. I mean, you did have the Black Panther Party and other organizations that talked about being black and proud. But 90% of what they were talking about was how they were being oppressed, right? And I think that there is a psychosis that goes along with a victim mentality, right? So in other words, if you go into something with a victim mentality, then it stunts your growth, right? Because there is, the thing about American society is that the lines are blurred, very blurred if you happen to be an African American. The blurred lines are that there is a certain amount of pushback when you're trying to achieve any goal, whether you're black, white, no matter who you are. There's haters, there's problems that go along with just life in general. Then on the other hand, you also have, which I feel can be just as equal, the whole idea of people who may try to oppress you because of the color of your skin. So now, how do you navigate the pushback that is the result of just anybody's journey, and the pushback that is either contaminated by also what goes along with the typical pushback, with also that additional problem of some of it oftentimes being because of the color of your skin, or those sort of things. So it's very difficult to navigate that. That's what makes it very difficult. And so oftentimes when you can't help but having the PTSD of being black in America and truly understanding, that's the one thing that sometimes becomes the drawback of being a conscious, is that once you become conscious, then to some degree it impacts um, your thinking, your analysis and your thinking process, because you realize that that race goes in to really, people want to tell you, and there's a lot of people who disagree now today, says race doesn't matter. That's just something, it doesn't matter. I'm an American. Race really doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter just simply because you don't want it to matter. Racism black culture was in many ways a reaction to white racism. And so when you have someone who now we see in the political spectrum, many black people who have now become Republicans, and not just saying that all black Republicans fall into this category, but there are, because a lot of black people who were Republicans, and I know people make the argument that post, the Reconstruction era, there was a lot, the Republican Party was for black people. We realize that that seems like an empty argument because we know that the idea and philosophies of parties have switched. So that, I mean, and I'm not really into that type of set tripping anyway. If Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, Bloods, Crips, Vice Lords, all of that, tends to be more of, you know, we kind of have to get away from that mob mentality of trying to identify with one or the other. Because I think that we are more complicated as human beings, that we cannot be boxed into one political party. However, I think that when people go to the Republican Party and make statements such as, or even Democratic Party, whatever your philosophy is, or independent, and say that racism doesn't matter anymore. Racism does matter. However, because you can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's one thing to say race doesn't matter, but it's another thing to try to figure out how to navigate it and how you're going to allow that to impact your success, right? And I believe that's where the doctrines that came in from the Nation of Islam of doing for self. But another thing that's really important is the values that came with it. The values that came with being in the nation. Now, values is not just necessarily, is not just a Nation of Islam concept. Obviously, values was you know was basically part of different social economic. It's not limited to that, but when we think about the values that we had, as we think about the family, the black family at that juncture, prior to as we go into the 1970s after the passing of the Civil Rights Act, when we think about the issue of how we respected our parents, how we respected our elders in general, how we just had respect for ourselves. Um, there's things you did and you didn't do. I mean, those are things that we basically have gone that we don't focus on anymore. That's not part of the discussion. And however, but at the same time, that is where we are continuing to have the crisis that we're having in Black America. Now, someone can say, well, whatever is going on in Black America, it's not racism, it's what Black people are doing to themselves, right? Whether you're talking about the Black family, whether you're talking about the numbers as it relates to the incarceration rate, whether we're talking about the issues as it relates to the economics, whether we're talking about the issue as it relates to, single parenthood, all those things are even vices. Clearly, black people do not use drugs at a higher rate than anyone else. However, the penal system actually tends to show the numbers are skewed against black people. And so, as we keep those things in mind and as we're beginning to make truly, if you want to make a difference, because there's people who, for example, are saying, we have this thing called cooning that we talk about among black people, where we're saying that basically, you've left the black community, you're not really committed to the community, you're dating outside of your race, you're doing all these things, and we're talking about whether you're talking about black nationalists, pan-Africanists, any of those things. Though what's absent in those movements, what's absent in pan-African movement, what's absent in the black nationalist movement, what's absent in many of these movements that we're having, where we're talking about black collectivism. Black collectivism is going to be very limited as to the progress of all African people if it does not focus on values and it doesn't focus on discipline. Because um, the self destruction is a an issue that is affecting all of those movements. Because we're talking about a mindset, right? However, the discipline is the most important part of the whole movement. It's just like we understand money, and money is not going to. Now there's a big focus on getting the bag. You know what I mean? So that's the whole thing. Is like, now I know how to get the bag. Make your money, because now we believe that getting the bag um, is somehow related to something we didn't do before. Black people didn't know how to make the money. Make sure you get the bag. And so when you think about the whole idea about getting the bag, we teach our children about investing. We're starting to say, well, let's teach our children about real estate. Let's teach our children about generational wealth. You know, there's a lot of money in the black community. There's trillions of dollars that we spend in consumer, as consumers. But if you lose your values in the process, you're not going to see uh, any progress. I mean, let's look at what we're thinking. What do they go after black people for when they become successful? Whether you're talking about Bill Cosby, whether you're talking about Diddy now, whether you're talking about all these individuals who got, and I'm not saying this. It's clearly you have people in the white community who are actually being taught, being arrested and in the media for the same thing. But we don't have that many people in the black community that got that kind of money. And when they do get that kind of money, it's always things that relates to their values. Even when it came to Dr. King, I mean, when there was, and the COINTELPRO, they were listening in on Dr. King to show that he was a womanizer. You know what I mean? That he was cheating on Coretta Scott King. They were trying. That's been a tactic in this country for a long time, to take the best of us and to try to show everyone else to bring that person down. But the people who are actually making, who are criticizing these individuals the most happen to be black people themselves. So if you go through YouTube and you start seeing individuals who are giving these podcast interviews, many times they're giving interviews at the expense of other popular black people by trying to just throw shade on somebody else. So it then goes back to the whole idea of values. I mean, of course, if that's not the focus of the community, is values, then it's going to continue to be this crisis among the numbers among black people in prisons are increasing. How is it that we are now having more so-called economic power, but we continue to see African Americans being charged? And one could say that it's because the government targets black people more than they do other people. That is an argument. But I would submit that the issue is really more focused on, we kind of, we didn't know the assignment. And I think that had there had been a combination of the underlying values and do for self policies and doctrine of the Nation of Islam that was more adopted by some of the other organizations, then I think that we would have gone a lot further in where we're going. Because that's what we taught our kids. I mean, that a lot of people that came from the generation before me just felt like that if you send your kid to school, they get their education, they go into the job market, they make, maybe get a good job, and then they're going to be fine. And then that generation taught their children, well, I'm going to give you materialistically the things that I never had. I'm going to allow you to see things I never had. And each generation continues to go through this path. However, what some of our ancestors had was something that you couldn't buy, and that was a values. The values that you get from struggle is sometimes not passed on from generation to generation. And because you're not having this, it's just like now. I mean, we live in a different time. We know how to co-parent, and everything's cool with that. We're cool with co-parenting. It's a new generation. The traditional family structure is something that we really don't honor. You know what I mean? Whereas it should be, you're embarrassed to go bankrupt, but you're not embarrassed to leave your family. And to me, that's crazy, right? I mean, if I lose my mansion, I'm embarrassed. If I lose, my Bentley, I'm embarrassed, right? If I can't floss all these things on Facebook or Instagram of all the material things that I have, then that's more of the focus. However, what about the dad I am? What about the husband I am, or the spouse that I am, or the son that I am? You know what I mean? And so we get lost in that, and it's become normalized. You know what I mean? And it's amazing about the things that embarrass you today, or what we tend to be, what we tend to focus on when it comes to our ideas of success and our ideas of fulfillment. And the black community, and I'm just speaking of the black community because I'm sure this goes across the whole country, I think, is in a crisis when it comes to values. But specifically as it relates to the black community, you're not going to see any progress until we get a hold of that. And I think that when and beyond the whole idea of focusing on any specific any specific religion, even when we talk about religion, it's a different discussion. What we're allowed to see even in the church, and just also when I talked about that I'm out in the nation, I am a Muslim, and I try to strive to be the best Muslim that I possibly can be, and have as much, and part of the doctrine of me being a Muslim is having faith in my Creator and being focused on that, giving me that spiritual foundation, and doing the right thing. Nowadays, that tends to be, we've blurred the lines between our, what's right in the church and the masjid and the temple. So now we've got, and now you can't the problem is, even in this country, you cannot attack people who are doing things that tend to be wrong as far as values are concerned. But they can attack you for being spiritual. So if I get on here and I tell you about my spirituality and the things that I believe in spiritually, what I believe about the marriage, what I believe about, taking of family, what I believe about, discipline, what I believe about trust, what I believe about loyalty, all these things, then, that could be attacked. However, if someone gives you the opposite opinion, and we had this discussion, I'd get counseled. You see what I mean? I can get counseled by my stance on certain lifestyles, right? I mean, I could tell you then I'm a peacock, right? And I'm not going to go into my ideas, but I can tell you I'm a peacock. And, if I told you that I was a peacock, you might get in trouble for telling me that I'm not one. I can be anything that I want to be. I can be a peacock, I can be a bear, I can be anything that I want to be. And that's kind of where we are in society. And you get criticized when you attack someone because you're saying, well, this is what I want my children to see. This is what I want my grandchildren to see. I want my grandchildren and my children to understand, there's choices to be made. And I think there's people with values, we love everybody. But just because you love everybody does not mean that you have to lie. You still have to be truthful. And that does and that's where we are. We can't even tell the truth because if you tell the truth, you're going to get counseled. And I think that that's where we go back to the issue that if we really want, we're going in the wrong direction. And in fact, I think that there are people who understand that we're going in the wrong direction and really don't have the answers because we're going in the wrong direction at a rate that people aren't really able to digest it. And because we can only digest so much, that we're making political decisions that are rash, right? So in other words, it's like if we're going down the wrong road as a society in our value system and what we consider to be right, I just know that we're wrong. I don't want my kids to see this. I know that these things aren't right. So now I'm going to go to the polls and make a drastic decision because I know that whatever way we're going is wrong, right? And sometimes whoever symbolizes that, then that's who I'm going to go for. You know what I mean? And so, we're really, going down the road as a nation, but as a nation of people within the African American community, it's even going to be more drastic because we're going to continue to go down that road. Like I said, a lot of these. Let me give you an example, and it's probably not going to be a popular thing to say, but I don't want my daughter twerking. I don't want my grandchild twerking. I don't want my grandchild to see another woman not fully clothed on a stage in front of a bunch of people, exposing herself and twerking. I don't think I just don't think it's a good look. I don't think it's a way that we should be raising our children. I don't think it's not good. And but at the same time, you cannot run for the highest office in the land and have people on stage that are known to twerk at your campaign rallies. You see what I'm saying? And all it does is it adds fuel to the fire. What's wrong with Stevie Wonder performing? What's wrong with Lionel Richie performing? And now what we want to do is at the expense of the bag, we're willing to sell our souls. And is it worth the outcome? You know what I mean? So, is it okay? It's not okay. I just don't think it's okay. Because if you're going to co-sign people who do these things that aren't a good look for our kids, people are going to have a problem with that, nor is it going to motivate me to support you. And that's where it goes to the whole idea of the issue of when we talk about the values that came with that particular movement, that's where I go back. When I think about the things that we should focus on as black people and the things that I think, and people in general, because I think it goes across the land, but specifically us as African Americans, when I think about the things that we should focus on when it comes to our children, and now we want to know what's wrong with them. You know what I mean? They're exposed to so much now, and now it's more. It's actually more critical that we establish those values and establish the issue of right and wrong, right? Then before you know it, people are going to be twerking in the pulpit. They're going to be twerking in church. Where does it stop? You know what I mean? If you're going to allow someone, and come on, we have to also be careful about who we give the lifetime achievement awards to. Just because you sell records, just because you can play basketball, play football, just because you can do these things that tend to be popular culturally, does not mean that, you know, you should necessarily be held in high esteem. So, in other words, if I'm very much a fan of Malcolm X, and I'll tell you why. And we call him Malcolm X, but who is also known as El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, is that Malcolm, when the FBI was, listening in on him, there is, at least from the movie, and we believe it to be true, there was a statement that compared the king, this guy's a monk, meaning they were listening to him talking to his wife. He was an upstanding human being. He was a strong man. He was a father. He was a husband. And that's a hero, right? And he was also interested in making a difference. Now, when we're looking to find people today to be put on the forefront, well, oftentimes is whether they are, let's just say if someone's a billionaire, he may be seen in the community as someone who is positive within the community because he is a billionaire. But what type of person is he? I want you to look at this person. I want you to see that he was able to get this kind of wealth, amass this amount of wealth. And because he's able to amass this kind of wealth, that's who I want to be, that's who I want you to look up to. The person that for me, for example, that I believe is a hero was my grandfather, who was a janitor. He cleaned, banks and law offices. But the reason why he was my hero was because of the man that he was, the impact that he had, and as he was, the fact that I was able to see a man every day work to take care of his family, work to take care of his children, and that tried to be a man of God. So that's my hero. Not someone who can sell records, or I love music. In fact, I'm going to a concert tonight. I love sports. I played sports as a kid. You know what I mean? All the way up till I was 18. I even played when I was in the military as well. So I love football. I love watching basketball. I love all these individuals. But even when I look at athletes, I kind of want to see, well, who is, what is it about this guy outside of, the grit, the field, what makes him a great person? You know what I mean? And so, and I think that we have to look at that, and we have to stick to it, and we have to, in many ways, pray for those who, are put on that pedestal, and do whatever it is that they have to do to get the bag. And that's who we really give a lot of praise to. But I think that what we have to do is, I think that we have to reevaluate what was really. I'm not saying that any of the other movements were not important or needed, because I think that they were all vital to the progression of black people based upon what was happening at the time. But I think that that one of the movements that's often unrecognized is the Nation of Islam. And I think that oftentimes it's probably not recognized based on a couple of things. One being the fact that I guess it's more seen as a religion, right? And not necessarily seen as a movement, which it was a movement. I mean, because it was more than just, because they had economic systems in place. They had stores, they had different things that was happening. and trying to was Elijah Muhammad a perfect man? Of course he wasn't. Malcolm wasn't a perfect man. Um, the son of Elijah Muhammad, Warith Deen Muhammad, was not a perfect man. Nor is Louis Farrakhan a perfect man, and he gets criticized a lot for what they believe to be hypocrisy. He gets criticized a lot for many different things. But I think that sometimes, you have to give credit where credit is due, and I think that him, because the way that the nation went is there was, after the death of Elijah Muhammad, then Warith Deen Muhammad basically moved the nation into a orthodox uh, religion. In other words, more like international, just regular Islam as opposed to the theology of the nation. And after that, Minister Louis Farrakhan basically came back and kind of reignited the nation. And and so I think that again, there is benefits. There's things that we as a community can learn about the value system of the nation, that we, otherwise, I think that we're missing out on. Because I think, and not that saying that someone can't get these things from the church or that they can't get these things from the temple. I'm sure that there's other ways of looking at it, but I'm just saying specifically, consistently, from a doctrine perspective, it has been a very now Islam in general has been very positive for the African American community, because in this country, probably 25% of the Muslims in this, it seems like a small number, but when you think about, and when I say 25% of the Muslims in America are African American. We often consider them to be what we call indigenous Muslims, because obviously when Islam was not really popular in this country, probably this country's first introduction to Islam came from the black community. And a lot of black people actually have converted to Islam. And when you think about the 25%, what's interesting about the 25% of the African American who are Muslim, African Americans of the Muslim community, probably 50% of them are converts. They're basically converting to the religion, and many of it is it from the penal institutions where they actually get introduced to it. And a lot of times the reason why there is this, you know, attractiveness of it is because of the discipline and focus. And it's not, usually the thing about being converse is you get it uncut, meaning that basically it's not contaminated by the culture, where many of your immigrant Muslims are basically, they are contaminated in many ways where they mix their culture with Islam. And many of the things that they do, you know, it's like my dad was a Muslim, so I'm a Muslim. Whereas someone who comes into it where you're led to it through your own research and enlightenment, which I think is very, very positive, as far as many of us who converted. But again, just going back to the issue of what we need to do to move forward as black people. I mean, we definitely have to get back, and you know, get back to the whole ideas of the value system, and do more of a very thorough research. I would love to see, you know, a lot more research go into not necessarily the theology of the nation, but just the doctrines itself, and you know, the brilliance of it. It started early. I mean, like in the 1930s, and obviously it really grew in popularity in the 50s, especially when Malcolm became, you know, a member and got out of prison and became somewhat of the national spokesperson. And we have to remember, many of us who are inspired by Malcolm, most of what you heard was during the time period that he was with Elijah Muhammad, and that he was speaking a lot of what he was talking about came from the ideas. He was a better speaker than the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he had a great way of conveying the message, and he did, and the numbers just dramatically grew when he came to the nation. But again, going back to the idea of the doctrine of doing for self, the values, and your mental and spiritual, health, has to be at the forefront. And I think that if we begin to start doing that analysis, because just imagine if we had, like when we talk about the issue of police brutality, we talk about the issue of the economic crisis, the social, the family crisis. We talk about all those things that we're dealing with, and what would fix that? I mean, America's not going to fix that. America, no matter what happens, is, they can get their knee off your neck. That would help. And reparations, I do believe in reparations. I think that money is owed, to be honest with you. I'm not going to hold my breath, but when you consider what has happened to what other groups have been able to get financial compensation for the things that happened to them, we've never been able to get that in light of what we contributed to this country. That had a lot to do with the reason why so many black people voted for Donald Trump, was because they were really, upset with the immigrant issue, where they felt like that there were immigrants that were given assistance in a manner and at a rate that was inconsistent with all the stuff that black. I mean, it's like they just skipped over black folks when they thought about, well, who should we really help? There's a crisis there, but what else are we going to do for them? So a lot of them, they were really, had an issue. Although I may not agree with it, that was at least the perception by a lot of people, where they were seen as immigrants were being given special treatment, or treatment that black people didn't receive. So, but just going back to the issue of, as we're looking at really what's going to help, if America is not going to give us our so-called, or at least help black people on a mass scale when it comes to the crisis and issues that we're dealing with, much of it being the result of the centuries of being disenfranchised, then the issue is going to be, what do we do? Because if they're not going to do it, then we have to start focusing on an issue of doing for self and being collective. And part of that is going to have to address the issue of values and culture, and getting back to some of the things that we used to do, or some of our ancestors, because I think they were a little bit more brilliant than we want to give them credit for. So I think in the final analysis, I think that what we have to do, if we want to really begin to, because although I've spent this time and we spoke about the need to do a real in-depth analysis of the nation, I do want to say that in order for us to progress, we can learn from it. The reason why we should do the research about the doctrines of the nation outside of the theology is because I think that it establishes and focuses on at least several things that we have to focus on in order for us to go forward. Number one is that we have to look at it as it relates to the issue of values. We have to make that the forefront, that values have to be first and the most important, regardless of any other social, economic, political paradigm that we're looking at, whether it's communism, whether it's Pan-Africanism, whether it's black nationalism. No matter what it is, if there's not a focus on values, then it's nothing else is really going to work. So we have to focus on values, but also what comes with values is focusing on discipline. I think that what comes with, if we don't have the discipline, regardless, you can, if you're not disciplined in any other paradigms, it's not going to work. And so when we talk about the issue, and number three, and probably most importantly, we're going to have to focus on the family. I think that we have to get away from this whole idea of looking at family and a new idea of what family really is. They all kind of, although they all fit together when we talk about the issue of family, because I think that comes with the discipline, but those have to really be at the forefront. And then when we talk about building generational wealth, I think building generational wealth continues to be an important aspect of it. However, I think that it really doesn't, it's really not, it cannot be number one. Number one has to be values, discipline, family, and last but not least has to be our connection to our faith. We have to believe more in our Creator, and again, not allow those lines to blur as we've had in the past. Those are the four things. So in order for us to progress as a people, I'm hoping and praying that we do look back at that movement as it relates to the doctrines that we can, get from it, and utilize that in order for us to progress, as a people. And so once I became an attorney and opened up my own law office, then my whole idea, my whole mission at that point was to make this difference, to make the change in the world. I understood this was my purpose. I understood that I was supposed to change the world. How I was going to do it, I wasn't quite sure, because as we know, there's so many different things that you can do to actually change the world.
I did not feel safe. That's why I decided to come here to California, because I didn't feel safe in Mexico.
It's kind of like the system, and if you go outside the system, then it becomes a struggle.
He's tenacious in his pursuit of justice for people, and that is refreshing in this day and time.
I crossed the border back in 1999. I was kidnapped by Americans. They held me in their house with my daughter for 2 weeks, locked in the room.
The whole idea of being someone within the system that's trying to make a difference and make a change, there's a lot of resistance to that by the so-called system itself.
I feel that when it comes to picking a career, following your passion, the underlying paradigm of it always has to be, what did I do to help others along the way?
Even though I went to the police station, I still thought I would be going home eventually. If my children's father did something wrong, why do I have to pay his consequences?
So now you've gone to being mistreated by, officials from your country of origin, to coming to a country where you're trying to seek your freedom, and then you're also mistreated here by these officials.
Purpose is to help others. He always loved to help people.
Told me that he was moving to California. Of course, it upset me because I was close to him and his kids, but I knew he was going to do something with his life.
I did expect better treatment from the U.S. court system. She tried by every means to make everyone feel like they were worthless. She would make you feel like you're nobody, and made it clear she could do what she wanted with your case.
He cares a lot about people, and for him, he truly believes he was put in this world for a purpose.
We began to start preparing for what would be an asylum hearing on your behalf.
I don't think I would have been better in Mexico. I don't. But if you can compare it, it's really almost the same situation. I only go in circles. to the same violence I tried to leave. It was very hard because I saw many things, people abusing other people, violating people's rights.
Well, here you have this system and you have these heartless individuals that are involved in the system that instead of, fighting for justice and trying to change the law, you find yourself sometimes fighting the system itself.
He wants to build a legacy, and he still thinks he's building the legacy, which I think he is, but I think at some point he has to realize that he's done a lot, and he's built that legacy already.
When I got out of immigration jail, I felt happy because I knew I was going to be able to hug my children. I was so happy when that moment became a reality.
I'm not really moved by how far I can take my career, nor am I really moved by the material or financial success of my career. The only thing that I'm moved by is my conscience and ultimately bringing about the glory to those individuals that are in need of it.
People have setbacks. Some people, once they have a setback, they just give up.
Being back in the free world, I can appreciate it. You realize freedom is a reality which God allows us to have.
The most important thing is really the journey itself. And I think a lot of people don't value, the process of getting to where you want to go. And sometimes along the way, I think that too often people don't appreciate both the failures and successes when they're on this journey.
Purpose means for me to fight for something I want, for my well-being, for my children, for my family. For me, the purpose of recovering my children is something I can't help.
These people that we entrust our lives, our liberty, and our safety to aren't protecting us.
I'm thankful because he's a great person, a very important person in my life, and I know he always cared for me. All the time. He had every intention to help me with everything I needed. Everything.
Everybody in the family is proud of Zulu. He's accomplished everything he wanted to, and more.
There's two types of people. There are people who give, and there are people who take. Some people, they come through the world, and basically all they do is take. The world could exist with you, or the world could exist without you. And then there's some people that come along and basically they figure out ways to help other people. They give.